When you create yourself to make it, you can either take a chance on being loved or hated for who you really are, or you can kill who you really are and fall into your grave grasping onto a character you never were. That was a quote that Jim Carrey shared in a documentary called Jim and Andy. It's on Netflix. I highly recommend it. The documentary is part about him doing Man on the Moon, playing Andy Kaufman, and then part about him in his life and his career and the parallels that ran and all the movies that he did and how they were aligned with his life. And it was a fascinating documentary. And when I heard that quote during the documentary, I literally had to hit pause as I was watching and just sit there, I think for like 5 minutes and just take that in. And I don't particularly know why that resonated so much. And if I had to speculate right now, I would say it's perhaps because I've done that on more than one occasion. Killed who I really was to try to be liked, to try to get a job, etc., etc., in all forms of work and love and life and education and all those things. And I don't think this is a good thing. And there's a book called The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that name, but if you look up The Myth of Normal, Gabor Mate, you'll find the book. And he talks about something similar, how the world and work especially asks us to murder who we really are and to show up in a certain way. And you'll see this in companies where they're like, hey, we want you to be authentic. And then you are, they're like, well, not like that, not that authentic. And this is something that I have struggled with for a good part of my life. That is, do I show up as who I really am and maybe risk losing an opportunity because who I am might not resonate or might even repulse the individual or organization that I'm trying to attract? Or do I try to tone it down and save that real authenticity for certain areas of my life? I don't know. I really don't know. You know, people say, well, there's work appropriate behavior and then there's personal appropriate behavior. Kinda, maybe. Does that mean you aren't being truthful at work or aren't being who you really are? And then I would say, how is that helpful to the organization? How is that helpful to you? Now, I know how this might be helpful to an organization because it's a good way to control people. And if you create an environment where folks are afraid to show up as they really are, it's a good way to control folks. So this is a dilemma that I continue to think about and continue to wrestle with. And the irony of this is that I actually have the most respect for folks who show up as they really are, or seemingly show up as they really are. I admire them very, very much. And maybe it's because I don't have the courage myself to show up fully. A scene from a film, one of my favorite films, Philadelphia, was where Tom Hanks' character is in a library. And if you're not familiar with the film, it's a beautiful, beautiful film by Jonathan Demme. Tom Hanks wins his first Oscar. He's across from Denzel Washington, who is just magnificent in the film. And there's this beautiful scene in a library where it's very clear that Tom Hanks is sick, also sick with AIDS. And he's doing research in the library about AIDS-related discrimination. And the librarian shows up and gives him a book that he was looking for. And he asks him if he would be more comfortable in a private study room. And Tom Hanks' character, Andrew Beckett, says, no, I'm fine, thank you, out here. And then the librarian just stands there over the table. And Denzel Washington's character, Joe Miller, is watching us. Now, Joe Miller's a black man, and he knows what it's like to be a lawyer, a black lawyer in a predominantly white profession. And what's cool about Denzel Washington's character is he's beautiful because he's a victim of and also a perpetrator of racism at the same time, or bigotry at the same time. But there, Denzel Washington is watching Tom Hanks' character, and the librarian's still standing there, and Tom Hanks kind of gives him a shrug like, okay, you know, what's up, man? And then the librarian says, are you sure you wouldn't be more comfortable in a private study room? And Tom Hanks, Andrew Beckett, looks around, sees some folks kind of staring at him. He realizes what's going on. And he looks at the librarian and he says, no, would it make you more comfortable? And Denzel Washington's character, Joe Miller, stands up and comes over to the table and kind of shoos away the librarian. And there's this beautiful moment between Joe Miller and Andrew Beckett because they're both attorneys. And Andrew Beckett was let go, and this is a spoiler alert, was let go not because he had AIDS, but because he was gay. And Joe Miller realizes this discrimination and connects with him there, and he asks him, so how did they know you had AIDS? Andrew Beckett says, well, they noticed a lesion on my face, etc. And they have this exchange where he's like, well, how do you go from seeing a lesion, which could be anything, to firing you? And Joe Miller starts to help him realize that there's maybe something else going on here. Now, earlier in the film, Andrew Beckett went to Joe Miller to represent him, and Joe Miller said no because he had AIDS and he didn't want anything to do with it. And he said it's personal reason, no. Well, what happens is because of this and because of what happened in the library in that exchange, he becomes his lawyer. And he's forced to face his own prejudice, Joe Miller, Denzel's character. And it's really a beautiful film about being who you really are and the injustices that can happen and the cost to being who you really are. And like any cost and like any risk, I think we weigh it out. What are the positives? What are the negatives? Not everything weighs the same. Not everything is weighted equally. We have preferences that are higher on a list or weigh more heavily than other things. But back to this idea of killing who you really are. I don't know if I want to continue to do that as a human being. I don't know if I want to continue to put down who I am so that people will feel more comfortable. See, because for me, I was raised to believe that it's a mortal sin to make someone uncomfortable. I don't mean be inappropriate with people to make them uncomfortable. I just mean your presence, your preferences, how you express yourself, how you move through the world. This can be offensive to some people or scary to some people, usually because they're projecting onto you their insecurities and they're not courageous enough to be who they really are. So they'll want to tear you down. I like to say, beware those who secretly admire you. The Nurse Ratcheds of the world, if you know One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And here was a human being who admired McMurphy greatly, but secretly admired him and tore him down because of that, and eventually killed him because of that, because she couldn't face her own insecurities. As the years go on, the question remains, the fact remains. These are the people who I admire most, the ones that move through life being who they really are without apology. And when I was at Rutgers in my MFA acting program, which was an incredible, incredible program, you've probably heard me talk about it often on this show. But in movement class, we have movement class, something like 8 hours a week. I think the class was like 4 hours a pop of movement or 3 hours a pop of movement. We had at least 2 days a week of movement. And they, as we were moving through the room, they would make us recite the phrase, I have no apologies. I have no apologies. And it took me some time after school to realize the purpose of that, of reciting that, of that mantra. And my teachers, who were all incredibly talented, caring, visionary humans, they knew that if you walk into the audition room, and if you walk in and apologize for your presence, you're not going to go very far. You can't. As the late, great Kelly Kimball once said, you have to have somewhat of a beautiful arrogance to do the work of an actor, to really be a star. But then there I am, struggling in between, do I risk making someone uncomfortable and getting attacked, so I tone it down? Or do I say, well, this is who I really am, and as long as I can sleep with, put my head on the pillow at night and rest well, or look at myself in the mirror and be okay, does it really matter what other people think? And for me, one of my most near and dear beliefs is that that which is most personal is also most universal. Meaning all that personal stuff that we might be ashamed of is really the stuff that binds us all together, that connects us. I know this is true. I've listened to the stories in AA, in acting class. I've been with now in the thousands of people while they stood in front of a camera, oftentimes naked in front of the camera, and have to go into that situation where they may have been nude for the first time in front of a camera lens or in front of someone other than their partner kind of thing. And to have to create a space for that person to sit in that. And I've realized that I've been told many times I have a gift for setting people at ease. And I think part of it, and I realized this a little while ago, was that I thought at one point in time, if I could set people at ease and I did it for enough people, I would never have to do it for myself, which of course isn't true, but it was true for me for a long time. And I think still now is true for me. So this episode is about me admitting that I do still struggle with, should I be who I really am or should I not? Now I have this collage of myself, and my Instagram is now private for this reason. And I've been withdrawing from the world because I'll eventually be a therapist, and I'm thinking, well, how is this stuff going to play when I'm a therapist? All my photography, all my art, all my expression, is this going to be okay for my clients? Is this going to alienate me or turn people away, or will it turn people towards me? I don't know. But there's this collage I created in the original Soho Creative Studio. It's one of the coolest things. I'm getting emotional right now. It's one of the coolest things. It's one of the most meaningful things I ever did. I was coming off reading a book called The Untethered Soul, which is a beautiful book, and I highly recommend it. And I called the image Untethered. And all I did was I took my Fuji X100 camera, I put it on a tripod, I pulled out a sheet of seamless paper in the old Soho Creative Studio at 158 Grand Street in New York, and I turned on Face to Face, which is one of my favorite bands, a punk rock band. Most people don't know who they are. And I put the shutter on interval timer, so it takes a shot every like 3 seconds or whatever you tell it. And that collage is the result of what happened with me in that space, alone, a camera, and that music. And it is by far the piece of creativity from me that resonates with most people, and they just love it. They're just blown away by it. And I used to have that image on my website, but I took it down because I was afraid that because I want to work with corporations or larger companies that would keep me out of the running because they couldn't bring someone like that on. Or maybe I'm getting a little too old to have an image of me like that out there. So I withdrew it, and I made my Instagram private because I didn't want the world to see me as I really am, for fear of judgment, for fear of being left out or alienated or losing opportunities in the future. I think really mostly losing opportunities in the future. Yeah, this was the first pause I think I've taken in this whole episode. It will probably be shorter when this goes live, but yeah, I don't know why I paused there. I'm learning to get more comfortable with pauses in my therapy training. And they say that one of the things you don't want to do as a therapist is not let that pause happen. You say the client, the patient absorbs the thing or comes to the realizations in those pauses. And if you keep talking, both of you, you don't really come to anything because there's no space. So I usually don't get comments on these things, but if you care to comment about how you feel about killing who you really are or showing up as you really are, I'd love to hear your thoughts around this. I mean that sincerely. I'm very curious as to know if I'm not alone, if I'm alone. And it's mostly that, to be honest. It's selfish. I just want to know if anybody else feels this too. And if you do, I would love to hear it. Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Performance Edge. Thanks for hanging out with me solo. Lots more to come. And until soon.